From the outside, my life looked like something people pinned to vision boards. The Tudor house with its climbing roses and original crown molding. The husband who left espresso on my nightstand before his morning run. The best friend who knew my coffee order, my childhood fears, and the exact way I laughed when something caught me off guard. I was 36. I had the career, the marriage, the dinner parties where guests lingered past midnight because no one wanted to leave. Marcus and I had been married for 7 years. We met during our MBA programs, two overachievers in the same case study group who discovered, somewhere between the library and the rooftop bar, that they were also genuinely compatible. We built our life deliberately. The house in Brookhaven, the matching calendar apps, the Sunday ritual of farmer's market, and long walks. Predictability, I believed, was just another word for earned stability. And Danny, my best friend since our early 20s, had become the third heartbeat of our household. She knew where the spare key hung. She had the security code. She had been my maid of honor, my emergency contact, my person for 17 years. I didn't know she was also Marcus's person. Not yet. But some truths move quietly through a house before you notice them. It started the way these things always do, with something too small to name. Marcus began sleeping with his phone face down. Not dramatically, not obviously. Just a subtle repositioning that happened gradually enough that I almost didn't notice. Almost. We were watching a documentary on a Tuesday evening, glasses of wine, the easy silence of two people who'd run out of the need to fill space. His phone lit up on the cushion beside him. He covered it with his palm before reaching for his glass. I noticed the motion. Not the screen, just the motion. Late work email? I asked, because I am not by nature a suspicious person. Procurement, he said. Eyes still on the television. Boring. It was a reasonable answer. He was in supply chain consulting. Procurement emails at 10 p.m. weren't unusual. I accepted it without friction and refilled my wine. But that evening something lodged itself quietly in the back of my mind, the way a splinter does before you feel the ache. Not painful yet, just present. The next morning, he took his phone into the bathroom when he showered. He hadn't done that before. Not proof. Not even suspicion, really. Just a new pattern where there had been none. For 3 weeks, I waged a private war against my own instincts. I am not the kind of woman who spirals. I have always prided myself on rationality, on examining evidence before drawing conclusions. So I examined. Marcus had a demanding client cycle. End of quarter reports. He was distracted, that was all. And Danny, she had been quieter lately, canceling dinners, responding to texts with the abbreviated warmth of someone managing too much. But she started a new freelance project. She'd mentioned it twice, and creative people get consumed. I knew that. I chose to believe the reasonable explanations because believing them cost me nothing. But logic is only as good as the information it works with, and I was working with incomplete data. I began noticing the granular things. The way Marcus angled his laptop when I walked past his home office. The way Danny, at our last brunch, laughed at a joke I hadn't quite heard. A laugh that landed a half-second too late, as if it were covering something. The way her eyes moved to her phone and back to me. I felt ashamed of what I was cataloging. Suspicion felt like a form of ugliness I didn't want to be. So I told myself, I am imagining things. I told myself that for 3 more weeks. The proof arrived on an ordinary Wednesday. I came home early from a client meeting that had been rescheduled. The house was empty. Marcus's home office door was open, his laptop sitting on the desk, screen still active. He'd forgotten to lock it before leaving. I walked in to retrieve a lease renewal document we'd been co-signing for the investment property. His email tab was open. I wasn't looking for anything, but the subject line of the top thread was, timing, when do we tell her? Danny's name was in the sender field. I sat down. My breathing stayed even. My hands stayed still. I read every message in the thread, 47 of them, going back 11 months. Hotel check-ins under his corporate account. Shared playlists. A conversation about a ring that he'd already picked out. Plans for a trip to Portugal after everything settles. There was a message from Danny that said, she'll be devastated, but she'll be fine. She's always fine. There was one from Marcus that said, I just need the timing to be clean. I don't want the financial stuff complicated. The financial stuff. I closed the laptop with both hands, smoothed my palms on my slacks, and walked into the kitchen to start dinner. I had not yet cried. I would not cry for a very long time. That evening I made his favorite meal, pasta with a slow-cooked tomato sauce he said reminded him of his grandmother's kitchen. I opened a bottle of Barolo. I asked him about his day with the practiced ease of a woman who had not just had the floor removed from beneath her entire life. He talked about a client presentation. I listened and nodded and refilled his glass. Inside, something that had been warm was becoming something else entirely. Not cold exactly, but dense. Compressed. The way coal becomes diamond not through warmth but through sustained, enormous pressure. The affair itself was not the worst part. I want to be precise about that, because precision matters. What I sat with that night, lying beside him in the dark while his breathing slowed into sleep, was the architecture of it. The collaboration. The shared calendar of deception. The careful language of timing and clean. Words that reduced my marriage, my trust, 17 years of friendship into logistics. A schedule to be managed. They had planned around me. They had made contingency plans around me. I lay there, and I felt something clarify inside me the way a solution clarifies in a cold tank, all the murkiness dropping to the bottom, leaving something transparent and still at the surface. I knew what I needed to do, and I knew I needed to be very, very quiet about doing it. People misunderstand silence. They read it as passivity, as the language of women who accept what is done to them. But silence is infrastructure. It is the scaffolding behind which real work happens unseen. If Marcus was planning a clean financial exit, I needed to understand what that meant from every angle before he understood that I understood anything at all. I had a law degree I'd never fully used. I'd gone into corporate strategy consulting instead, but the training was there, dormant, and I dusted it off methodically. I spent that first week simply listening. At home, to his phone calls and his absences and his increasingly relaxed demeanor, the way a man settles into himself when he believes the difficult conversation is still safely in the future. At work, I began quietly researching divorce attorneys with particular expertise in asset recovery and financial concealment cases. I smiled at Danny when she texted that she wanted to reschedule our canceled dinner. I responded warmly with 2 or 3 carefully selected emoji. I suggested a Tuesday. At dinner, I watched her. She was bright-eyed and slightly distracted, and I loved her with the specific anguish of someone watching a familiar landscape burn. I had known this woman when she was 22 and afraid of everything. I had held her hand through her father's illness. She had stood beside me at the altar. I said nothing. I ordered dessert and asked about her freelance project. And I took careful note of everything she let slip. I have always been thorough. My colleagues call it a strength. I call it the habit of someone who learned early that underprepared people get outmaneuvered. Over the following 3 weeks, I assembled a private dossier with the discipline of someone building a court case, which I was increasingly understanding was exactly what I was doing. I accessed our shared Dropbox. I had the credentials, had always had the credentials, and found a folder Marcus had created 9 months ago labeled Tax Organizer 2024. Inside were documents that had nothing to do with taxes, wire transfer confirmations, correspondence with a financial advisor I'd never met, an account statement for a brokerage account in his name alone, seeded with transfers I could trace directly to our joint savings. I printed nothing on home equipment. I photographed documents with my personal phone and stored them in a cloud account Marcus had no access to. I called my former law school roommate, now a family law attorney in Atlanta, from my office with the door shut. I did not mention names. I asked, in abstract terms, about forensic accounting and high-asset divorce proceedings. The key, she told me, is catching movement before it's completed. Once assets are restructured, recovery gets messy. What's the window? I asked. She paused. Depends how long he's been moving things. I looked at the dates on the transfer confirmations. 9 months. I had time, but not infinite time. The money itself I had half expected, in the abstract way one expects something one hopes never to encounter. Men leaving marriages sometimes hide money. That was not a surprise. What I found next was something different. 3 years ago, when my mother died, she left me an inheritance. Not enormous, but significant. Money she had saved across 40 years of careful living, set aside for what she called your future, whatever shape it takes. Marcus and I had discussed what to do with it at length. We agreed to invest it conservatively. I deferred to him because he handled our investments and because I trusted him completely. That inheritance, $210,000, had been restructured. He had reinvested it in a manner that placed it, legally and quietly, under the umbrella of a business entity he created. An LLC with a name that looked routine in any document scan. My mother's money was technically no longer traceable to me. He had, I would later learn the precise legal term for, commingled and then converted it. There was an email. I found it on a subsequent quiet Tuesday when he'd left his laptop unlocked again, in which he'd written to Danny, "The inheritance piece is handled. By the time she figures it out, the structure will make it difficult to unwind." By the time she figures it out. I read that sentence 4 times. Then I scheduled a consultation with the best forensic divorce attorney in the state. Her name was Vera Callahan, and she came recommended by 2 different people who described her with the same word, ruthless. I sat across from her in her corner office on a Thursday afternoon, wearing my best blazer and carrying a folder of organized documentation, and I liked her immediately. She listened without interrupting. She did not wince or offer condolences. She took precise notes in handwriting, so small it looked like code, and when I finished, she set down her pen and looked at me directly. "Tell me what outcome you want," she said. "Not emotionally. Strategically. I want every dollar that was mine returned," I said. "I want the marriage dissolved in a way that accurately reflects his misconduct and concealment. I want the record to be clear. And the friendship, I considered that. I want her to understand what she participated in." Vera nodded slowly, as if I'd said something that interested her. "Here's what I want you to understand," she said. "The strongest position we can be in is one where they don't know we're building one. Can you maintain that?" "I've been maintaining it for 6 weeks. She allowed herself a small, precise smile. "Then we have time to do this right." I exhaled for what felt like the first time since I'd read that email subject line on an ordinary Wednesday afternoon. Someone was in this with me. Someone methodical and unsentimental, and very, very good. Vera retained a forensic accountant named Douglas, who wore wire-rimmed glasses and spoke about financial concealment the way a physician speaks about pathology, with clinical curiosity and no visible moral alarm. Within 10 days, Douglas had mapped the architecture of what Marcus had built. The LLC had been structured with a specific loophole in how our state treated marital business assets during divorce proceedings. On paper, the inheritance looked like a business investment that had been subject to market risk. Recouping it would require demonstrating that the initial funds were traceable to me and had been transferred without full informed consent, a classification that sits just inside the legal definition of conversion. He knew what he was doing, Douglas told Vera during a call I was included on. "The structure is too precise to be accidental." "Can we trace it?" Vera asked. "Every dollar. I have the wire origination records." There was also the matter of a second matter I hadn't known to look for. Marcus had listed himself as primary beneficiary on 3 accounts we'd opened jointly. He'd done it online, through a portal we both technically had access to but that I had never logged into. The changes had been made 14 months ago. 14 months. Danny and Marcus had been planning this longer than I had understood. I wrote the number on a notepad. Then I folded it and put it in my coat pocket, and I drove home, and I made dinner, and I said nothing. Memory is revisionist. I know this about myself. I know that once you discover a truth, you begin retroactively populating the past with evidence you'd categorize differently in real time. But some things could not be rationalized away. Marcus had spent 6 years gently, consistently positioning me away from our financial management. He framed it as division of labor. He was better with numbers. I was better with clients. Why not each do what we were each best at? I had accepted this because it seemed reasonable and because I had no reason not to trust him. He had suggested I take a step back from my own investment accounts after our wedding, to consolidate, make things simpler. He had steered me away from reading our annual financial summaries by providing his own simplified version, a 1-page overview he prepared himself. I thanked him for the efficiency. He had once said, when I'd asked about refinancing our investment property, "Leave the structure to me. You're better at the big picture." I smiled and left the structure to him. I sat in my office and looked at those memories the way you look at a photograph from a trip you misremembered as joyful and see, in a background figure's posture, something ominous you missed entirely. It hadn't been a partnership. It was management. And I had been managed. There is a specific moment in grief when the pain changes pitch. It stops being sharp, that early keening quality that cuts vertically through everything, and becomes something lower and wider. Harder to locate, but also, strangely, harder to be destroyed by. You stop hoping for an apology. You stop running the alternative scenarios. You step out of the burning room, and you close the door, and you look at what you still have and you make a list. I made mine on a legal pad in my office on a Thursday morning while the city did its ordinary business outside my window. What I had: financial intelligence, legal counsel, documented evidence, access to records they believed I couldn't read, and 6 more weeks of their complacency to work with. What I did not have: any obligation to warn them that the ground was shifting. I called my sister that evening and told her I was going through something. I didn't elaborate. She asked if I needed her to come. I said not yet. She said, "You sound like someone who has a plan." I said I was working on it. What I did not say: the plan was nearly complete. What I did not say: they had chosen the wrong woman to underestimate. I had spent my entire career walking into rooms where people had already decided who I was before I spoke. I had always let them believe that, and I had always let the results speak for themselves. I began executing the preparatory steps with the precision of someone defusing something complicated. I adjusted my direct deposits to a new personal account I'd opened at a bank we'd never used together. I did not change the joint account. I didn't want any flag, any flicker of unusual behavior. I simply added a quiet parallel stream. I secured hard copies of every relevant financial document from our shared records, the ones I had legal right to access, and stored them in a locked file at my office. Vera filed a preliminary motion that would, at the right moment, freeze the LLC's operating accounts pending judicial review of their origin. The motion was drafted. It was not yet filed. It was a key held in a lock, waiting. I encouraged Marcus's upcoming conference trip, a 4-day stretch in Phoenix that coincided, I had confirmed via the email thread, with Danny booking adjacent hotel rooms. I helped him pack. I told him I'd use the time to catch up with friends. I told Danny the same. Marcus is gone for the week. We should do something. She suggested dinner Thursday. Perfect, I said. I'll make a reservation. At dinner, she was relaxed and animated. She showed me photos of a dress she'd been looking at. For a trip coming up, she said, and I watched her remember and revise. For a friend's event. I told her the dress was beautiful. I meant it. It was. In the weeks before I acted, I prepared myself for what comes after. Not strategically, that was already handled, but emotionally. The clinical literature on betrayal trauma is thorough and not especially comforting. The neurological response to profound deception by trusted people mimics that of physical injury. The brain processes it as damage. Recovery is nonlinear. I began therapy. Weekly sessions with a woman named Dr. Lauren, who had the quality I most value in someone I am paying to know me. She did not reflexively validate. She asked good questions. "What are you most afraid of losing?" she asked in our 3rd session. I thought about it honestly. The version of myself who believed she was loved. "And what does that version of you deserve?" "To know that she wasn't foolish," I said. "That wasn't naivety. That she was deceived deliberately by people who worked hard at it." Dr. Lauren nodded. "The evidence suggests that's accurate." I also downsized my emotional architecture. I stopped imagining the children Marcus and I had discussed but not yet attempted. I stopped seeing his name in my future. I rebuilt the geography of my plans around myself alone, and discovered, which surprised me, that the geography held. I had been placing myself in my own story as a secondary figure for a very long time. That, I decided, was also going to change. Marcus became comfortable. This was useful. When a man believes the difficult part of something is still ahead of him, he relaxes into the present. He stops performing. He stops managing. He becomes himself. Or rather, he becomes the version of himself that exists when he believes no one who matters is paying attention. He started working from home less. He stopped explaining his schedule. He came home once smelling of a perfume I didn't recognize and simply walked past me into the bedroom, and the absence of even a plausible excuse told me everything about how little effort he now felt the situation required. He suggested, casually, over breakfast one Sunday, that we should talk about the future sometime. His tone had the practiced lightness of a person who has rehearsed. I looked at him and I thought, you have no idea that the future is already in motion, already documented, already one phone call from Vera away from becoming a legal reality. I said, of course. Whenever you're ready. He looked relieved. He refilled his coffee and opened his laptop, and I watched him from across the island, and I thought about my mother, who had saved 40 years of careful money and left it to me. I thought about what she would have wanted me to do with it. I thought she would have wanted me to get it back. And I would. She came over on a Saturday, unannounced, the way she had done for 15 years, knowing our door was always unlocked for her, knowing she was always welcome. I was in the kitchen. I heard her key in the lock, and I set down my coffee cup very carefully, and I composed myself the way I have learned to compose myself, from the feet up, like filling a vessel with stillness. She came in carrying pastries. Pink box. Bakery we both loved. She had done this 100 times. I could see, watching her arrange the pastries on the wooden board, the person she had been to me. Not the person I'd learned she was also capable of being, but the specific, complex person I had known and depended on. The woman who stayed on the phone with me for 4 hours after my mother's funeral, the woman who drove through an ice storm to bring me soup when I had the flu in my late 20s, who knew my particular pitch of laughter and matched it exactly. Grief for a living person is unusual because it carries no comfort. They haven't died. They've done something worse. They've revealed the distance between who they chose to be and who you believe they were. I ate a croissant. I asked about her week. I laughed at the right moments. She had no idea. And I felt something close to mercy, and then I let it pass. Vera filed on a Tuesday. I was at my desk when she called to confirm it. The preliminary motion froze the LLC's accounts pending review of commingled marital funds. The financial injunction was specific, surgical, and effective. Marcus would discover it when he next attempted to access the account, likely within 48 hours. I went to lunch. I ate a salad. I walked the long way back through the park and sat on a bench for 17 minutes and looked at the trees, which were an early October color, and I allowed myself to feel, very briefly, the full weight of what I had lost. Not just the marriage, the future I had been planning, the particular shape of the life I'd been building, the woman I had been when I still believed in what I'd been given. I sat with it for 17 minutes. Then I stood up and went back to work. That evening Marcus came home looking taut. He said nothing over dinner. After we'd cleared the dishes he mentioned, elaborately casually, that there had been a weird bank thing with one of his accounts. Oh, I said. Did you call them? I'll sort it, he said. He went to his office and shut the door. I could hear him on the phone. His voice stayed low. The fracture had begun. She called on a Thursday, which I had been expecting. I let it go to voicemail the first time because I wanted to hear what she said when she thought she was composing herself. Her message was careful, too careful, the cadence of someone choosing words, asking if I'd noticed anything strange with Marcus lately, anything financial. She said she was asking because she was worried about me. She was worried about me. I sat with the audacity of that for a long moment before I called her back. Danny, I said when she answered. She said my name with the inflection of someone bracing. Should I be worried? I asked gently. A pause. For seconds, which I counted. I thought you should know that Marcus might be going through something. What kind of something? I'm not sure exactly. Okay, I said. Thanks for letting me know. Another pause. Longer. Are you doing okay? I'm fine, I said. You know me. I'm always fine. I said it back to her in the exact register of her own email. She'll be fine. She's always fine. And I watched, across whatever invisible distance separates two people on a phone call, to see if she felt it land. She said, right. Of course. I said goodnight, and I hung up and I poured a glass of wine and I felt nothing at all, which itself was a kind of answer. I chose a Sunday. Mornings, I had learned from watching them, were when people are least offended. I was already at the kitchen island when Marcus came downstairs, sleep soft and barefoot, reaching for the coffee I'd made. Danny arrived 12 minutes later. She had a key, She always had a key, and she stopped in the kitchen doorway when she saw me sitting there with a folder on the counter and a stillness that must have told her something before I spoke a word. "Sit down," I said. Not unkindly, just clearly. They looked at each other once, the involuntary coordination of people who have been a unit, and then they sat. On opposite sides of the island, not together. "I noted that. I know about the affair," I said. "I know about the hotel bookings, the Portugal plans, the ring. I know about the LLC, and the inheritance restructuring, and the account changes 14 months ago. I know about the message where you called my exit clean, and the one where Danny said I'd be fine." I slid the folder across the island. Vera filed preliminary motions on Tuesday. The forensic accounting is complete. The documentation covers a 14-month period. Marcus's color had left him entirely. Danny's hands were on the counter, very still, as if she were keeping them visible on purpose. Neither of them spoke. "I don't need anything from you right now," I said. "My attorney will be in touch." I refilled my coffee and walked into the living room, and I heard, behind me, the sound of silence doing its work. The following week unfolded the way Vera had predicted, with bureaucratic precision and minimal drama. Legal notices were served. The forensic accounting report was filed as supporting documentation with the court. The motion to unwind the LLC's asset structure was granted, pending a 30-day review period in which Marcus's attorney would have to demonstrate that the funds were not of marital origin, a demonstration that Douglas's traceable wire records made effectively impossible. The financial institution flagged the beneficiary changes made 14 months ago as procedurally inconsistent with the account origination documentation. Those changes were rolled back pending judicial review. The wedding venue, I had found it in the email thread, a restored estate outside the city, received a courtesy inquiry from Vera's office regarding the status of an event deposit made with funds under review. That inquiry was not designed to destroy anything. It was designed to create uncertainty. It succeeded. Word moved, as word does, in the way of a city that is smaller than it appears. A colleague asked me at a networking event how Marcus was doing. I said we were in the process of separating. Her expression told me she had heard something specific. I smiled and changed the subject and let the information be whatever it needed to be. I had not spread anything. I had not needed to. The truth, properly documented, creates its own gravity. Marcus called without warning on a Wednesday evening. I was on my couch with a book I hadn't really been reading, and when I saw his name I sat up and answered. "I want to talk without attorneys," he said. His voice had a texture I recognized from difficult client calls, the particular flatness of someone who has assessed the situation and determined that negotiation is preferable to further combat. "We can talk," I said. A pause. "You didn't have to go this far." I thought about how to respond to that. About all the things this far contained. The evidence gathering, the legal filings, the forensic accounting. He meant, why couldn't you have been the kind of woman who makes this easy for me? "I didn't initiate any of this," I said. "I responded to what you built." Another pause. Longer. "I underestimated you." It was the most honest thing he'd said to me in over a year, and I didn't feel the satisfaction I thought I might. I felt something more like recognition, the acknowledgement from another person of a thing you already knew about yourself. "Yes," I said. He said. "Can we do this without it getting worse?" "That has always been up to you," I said. "Not me." He was quiet for a long moment. "Okay," he said finally. I told him to have his attorney call Vera. Then I hung up, and I went back to my book, and this time I was able to read it. The final terms took 11 weeks to negotiate, which Vera told me was fast. The court accepted the forensic accounting's determination that $210,000 in marital funds, traceable to my inheritance, had been diverted without informed consent and restructured into a business entity during active marriage proceedings. Those funds were returned, with statutory interest. The investment property was sold, and proceeds divided per the equitable distribution framework our state applies to long marriages. The beneficiary irregularities were corrected. The hidden brokerage account was included in the marital estate. Marcus's firm did not conduct a formal investigation, but there were conversations. I know the second hand from a mutual connection who mentioned them carefully over coffee, about the optics of a senior consultant whose financial disclosures during divorce proceedings had included previously hidden accounts. There were no formal consequences, but there were conversations. The wedding, I heard through the same careful secondhand, was postponed. Then postponed again. Then, as far as I know, it became something discussed in the future tense, rather than scheduled for a specific date. I did not pursue this information. I did not need to. I had not set out to destroy anything. I had set out to protect what was mine, and to ensure that the truth existed somewhere on paper, with signatures and official stamps and dates. Truth with proper documentation is harder to revise than truth that lives only in someone's memory. I had learned that from the people who tried to rewrite mine. Marcus asked to meet, 8 months later. A coffee place on neutral ground. Not our neighborhood, not his. Somewhere downtown that neither of us had claimed. I went because I was curious what he needed to say, and because I am not, at my core, someone who refuses conversations. He looked older. Not badly, just more accurately. Like the effort of maintaining a particular performance had been subtracted from his face, leaving something more honest in its place. We made small talk for a few minutes in the way of people who shared a decade and now share nothing, and then he set down his cup and said what he'd come to say. I built something with you, he said. I actually built it. And then He didn't finish the sentence. And then you chose to take it apart, I said. Not unkindly. Just precisely. He nodded. He looked at his hands. He said, I didn't think you'd. And then stopped again. You didn't think I'd? He looked up. Fight like that. I considered telling him that I hadn't fought. That I had simply been thorough. That thoroughness is not the same as aggression. That documentation is not the same as warfare, that he had confused my stillness for compliance and my trust for inability. Instead I said, I know. We finished our coffees. We parted on the sidewalk without ceremony. I drove home with the window down, and the air was cold, and I felt, of all the things I could have felt, grateful. I moved in October. A loft in the Arts District, 3rd floor, with windows that caught the afternoon light at an angle that made everything in the room look like it had been worth arriving at. I bought furniture I chose alone. I hung artwork without negotiating. I cooked things Marcus hadn't liked. Lamb, anchovies, food with preserved lemon, and ate them standing at the kitchen counter some evenings with a book propped against a fruit bowl, and I found that contentment, genuine contentment, does not require an audience. I traveled to Portugal in the spring. Not a reclamation. I want to be clear about that. Just a country I had always wanted to see, and now had no reason not to see. I walked Lisbon for 4 days. I sat on the hillside at dusk and ate sardines and watched the light go copper, and then amber, and then dissolve into the harbor, and I thought, I am here. I made it here. Not in spite of what happened, but entirely, separately from it. The friendships I rebuilt were deliberate. I am more careful now. Not in a guarded way, but in the way of someone who has learned that attention is itself a form of love, and that attention should be given to those who return it honestly. My mother's money is invested now under my name alone. I look at the statements myself. I have learned to read them. I sleep deeply. I had not, for some years, slept deeply. People ask how I kept it together. How I read that email thread and made dinner. How I sat across from Danny for weeks while knowing. How I moved through those months without breaking. The honest answer is that I did break, in ways that were private and real, and that I don't owe anyone a full accounting of. I broke into my car in the parking structures. I broke in the shower on Tuesday mornings. I broke into Dr. Lauren's office, which is what an office like hers is for. But I did not break in the places where it would have cost me. I want to be precise about why. I was not calm because I was cold. I was not strategic because I was without feeling. I was strategic because the alternative, to act from the rawest version of my pain, to shatter things in front of them without protection, would have benefited them. It would have made me the story. It would have made me the woman who couldn't handle it. I declined to be that story. The betrayal did not make me cruel. It made me honest about what I was dealing with, and it made me attend, finally, to the full scope of my own capability. I had been partial with myself for years, giving the better portions of my attention and energy to a structure that was being quietly dismantled around me. Now I attend to myself fully. That is the only revenge worth having. Not their ruin, but your own wholeness. The day I walked into that loft for the first time, alone, The light coming through the tall windows, I set down the single box I was carrying and I stood in the quiet and I thought, I am not what was done to me. I am what I did with it. And what I did with it was this. I paid attention, I protected myself, I told the truth, and I kept going. I kept going,